Hello everyone, Cody from EGW here. Along with me today is
Al.
And today we're going to do a little question and answer session about Savage actions and the rails that we have for them.
So, Cody, we get a lot of people calling into us. They email us, they knock on our door and scream at us, and they say, Cody, what in the hay is a Savage flatback? What is it? Why do I need to know this information, and who cares? Can you please give us some more information on the Savage flatback and why we care?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question, and like Al alluded to, it is one that we get asked quite a bit. Flatbacks Savages are the older model Savages. So Savage started making their rifles with the flatbacks in 1958, and they made them with the flatback on the receiver all the way up until 2002 when they came out with their Accutrigger. When they came out with that, that's when they rounded the back of the receiver off, and that's why we have the rail that we call our round back, and we can go into that in a little bit more detail later on. But the flatbacks are the older ones. They had 3 different action sizes, so that can sometimes be a little bit confusing. The best way to tell which model you have would be to look at the rear of the action. On a flatback, it is literally perfectly flat, and on the newer models, you'll see it's got a curve to it or a radius, just like the front contact area.
So I have my receiver in front of me with my Savage. I take a look at it, and in front of and behind the ejection port, if there's a radius, front and back, I know that I have a round back, and if it's radiused in the front and it's flat on the back, I know that I have a Savage flatback receiver. Now, you said before that there's 3 different action lengths for the Savage flatbacks. When I have my gun and I verify that I either have a flatback or a round back, I have a flatback. How do I tell what action length do I have? How do I know if it's a long action, a medium action, or a short action?
That's another great question, and thankfully Savage made getting a flatback rail extremely complicated, so that's perfect. The short action and medium action and long action, so there's 3 different choices of rails. The easiest way to tell the difference between them would be to measure the distance between the action screws in the bottom of the ones that hold your stock in. There's a pretty wide spread between the 3. The short action is only 4.275 inches. The medium action is 4.5, roughly 4.5, and then the long action is 5 inches. So you can measure that at home with a ruler. There's 2 other ways that you can measure. You can measure the ejection port opening, which is basically where your shell ejects out, the length of that. The short action there measures 3 inches, roughly 3 inches 40 thousandths. The medium is 3 1/4, roughly, and the long action is 3.8 inches. So again, you could probably measure that at home with a ruler. You have 1/4 inch differences between the 3. And then the last way would be up on top of the gun where your drilled and tapped holes are.
Okay.
You can measure the center spread, which is the distance between the 2 inside screws. And the short action is 3.93, the medium is 4.09, and the long is 4.63. So the short and the mediums it's kind of sketchy because they're pretty close together. The long action, you have a bigger disparity. So that's why I normally tell people to check out the ejection port opening or the action screws, because it's just easier. If you don't have calipers or micrometer, you can get that measurement with a tape measure and still be accurate enough to get the right rail. So
okay, cool. And then let's say I have my other Savage in front of me. I find out that I looked at the action on it and it's radiused in front of and behind the ejection port, so I have a round back at that point. How do I tell if I have a long action or short action round back? What are the measurements for that?
Well, luckily that is a little bit easier because Savage did away with the medium action, so they only have short actions or long actions now. You can determine short or long action based on numerical dimensions, like what we talked about here. The center spread of the short action, again, the 2 inside holes, is 3.93 inches, and the long action is 4.63. So there's a pretty big difference there. Again, you could use a ruler and get pretty close. If you're under 4 inches, you have a short action. If you're over 4.5, it's a long action. You can also go by caliber. There's common short action calibers that are pretty much always chambered as short actions.
So I'm going to shoot a 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm shooting it very far. Does that matter what my action length is, or how do I know? Like a 6.5 Creedmoor is a very common one we get asked for. What action length would that be?
A 6.5 Creedmoor in a Savage pretty much everything else that I've run across in the last couple years since 6.5 has been really popular is always a short action. Some people get confused. They think if they're shooting 1,000 yards, they're shooting very far, like Al kind of mentioned, that they need a long action, and that's not the case. The action size or length is determined on like the length of your bolt pull and the size of the chamber area or ejection port area. So common short action calibers would be 223, 308, 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm probably missing 243 is another common hunting round. Those would be all short actions. And then long actions with the longer bolt pull, longer, like this is a long action rail here, so you can see how big the ejection port area is. Those would be 270, 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 338 Lapua is a real popular one now too. So Savage, since we're talking about Savages, they chamber all of those long actions, even the 338, in just their standard long action footprint. So that makes it easy for us, easier.
Is there an easy way to tell, typically, if I have a round back one where there's certain models that you know, hey, I have this round back action, are there any features that are specific to the round back actions that I can say, oh, I have, you know, this handguard or whatever, and that will determine that I do in fact have a round back?
That's a tough one. The easiest way would be to look at the trigger. If you have the Accutrigger on the gun, then you know it's going to be a round back. 2002 was the cutoff for the Accutrigger, or I should say the start of the Accutrigger, the cutoff of the flatbacks. So, you know, if you don't know what year your gun is, which is kind of difficult to tell unless you would call Savage with your serial number, if you have the Accutrigger, it's going to be a round back. If you can get down to the bare receiver, you know, pull your optic off, and if you have two-piece bases on it, take those off. Just look at the contour of the rear mounting surface, and that would be probably the best way to tell. Now, Savage does have a lot of different variants on their guns now. They have ones with chassis and handguards and all that kind of thing, but the action itself is pretty much one of those two things. You're going to have a short action or a long action, and they're all going to be round backs. Since 2002.
Cool. I think what we'll have Zach do is right about now, he'll probably post up something with the part numbers for the long action rails and the short action rails. We make them in 0 and 20 MOA, so you should be able to see that on your screen now. And if you can't, then we gotta, you know, kick Zach in the butt and say, hey buddy, let's get these things on here. I think we nailed most of the questions here. Is there anything else you want to go into, or are you pretty happy with?
Yeah, I think we answered a lot of the questions that we get on an everyday basis. This is one that can be confusing up front, just because we have a lot of different offerings on our website. But if you start out by figuring out what type of action you have, flat versus round, you can eliminate a lot of the options. And then, you know, if you have the flat back on your gun, you can measure the action screws, and that'll tell you whether it's the short, medium, or long. And then if you do have one of the newer guns with the Accutrigger, you can, you know, look at your barrel. It'll have what caliber you have engraved on the side of it, and you can kind of base it off of that, or you can measure your center spread, and again, that'll tell you whether it's a short or long action. So if you kind of step your way down by the flatback, roundback action caliber, you can figure out which one you need.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the information. That's all that I needed to know, and you've been extremely helpful.
I guess Al is out, so tune in next week for more tech tips and question and answer sessions, and we'll try to help you guys out with more stuff. Thank you for watching.